All right. This is a very, very special episode of A Contemplative Reader because I have two guests this evening, and we are going to be talking about the series, The Tales of Alvin Maker by Orson Scott Card. So, with me tonight, I have Sam of the channel ISamwise. He's had me on his channel a couple of times, so it's good to return the favor and have you on here today, Sam. And also we have Paul Williams. Paul is I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more in detail, but he's the one that referred this series to me. I'd heard of Orson Scott Card, but I had not heard of Tales of Alvin Maker. So I'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. So Sam, let's go back to you. And if you could just, I think a lot of viewers of my channel know who you are, but just say a little bit about yourself and then what how you were first exposed to the series Tales of Alvin Maker, and some general introductory thoughts about it.
Yeah. Well, as Jay said, my name's Sam. I'll begin by saying, I think the biggest, the most significant thing that I got out of the series is you guys know how Philip Chase will do those like Dear Dr. Fantasy thumbnails where he takes somebody's face and puts it on a book cover. And if one of y'all goes on, you got to use the cover to Prentice Alvin with Alvin just being a hunk of a man right there. Man, these covers are definitely from the 80s, and I love them. They're so great. They're so sincere in their cheesiness, if you will. There you go. Yeah, exactly, Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
Even the
it.
more recent ones are still from the 80s somehow.
yeah, that's right. That's right. He's still got like his vest ripped halfway open.
So did
Um,
they have like intense gym workouts there in early 1800s America? Or what is going on with them? My goodness.
I guess.
That
Um,
might be when America was great the first time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
go ahead.
So I as you said, Jay, I was in a pretty similar boat. I read Ender's Game when I was 15 and was like, oh, that's nice. Read about 20 pages of Speaker for the Dead and was like, this is clearly
Mm.
not for me, and just
Oh,
moved on, being a 15-year-old. Um, and Card wasn't really on my radar for no particular reason, but just didn't didn't really think to go back to his stuff. I may have even thought at one point that all he wrote was Ender books. And then about 8 months ago, it was actually I was first talking with Steve Donahue and asked him what some Flintlock themed historical fantasy books were that he liked. And he said, oh, like Alvin Maker, like that is the one to get to. I was like, okay, interesting. And I like put it on my list, but didn't really consider it to be much of a priority. And then I think Paul also recommended it to me. And then Jay, when you said that Paul had convinced you to pick it up, I was like, all right, I'm gonna hop on this bandwagon. And so it was last December. I had some space in my reading schedule, didn't really have any plans, and so I was like, well, we'll pick up Seventh Son and just see how it goes. And this is the first time I've done this in a long time. Picked up Seventh Son and read back to back all six of the books in the series that are out, and just like fell in love with it. It's not to say that there's nothing about the books or that there's nothing that couldn't be improved or changed or things that people won't object to. Like it's not a series for everyone, but this is like almost perfectly tuned to like my taste and what I'm looking for in a series. Card's writing is very readable while being I don't know, feeling very mature at times as well. He handles some really difficult topics in what I felt like was with a very deft hand, and wrote very entertaining characters to follow. And so even in the later books where people will be like, is there as much forward momentum? Maybe not. I was still hanging out with characters that I just adored being around and thought were tremendously fun. And so for me, there's no, this is something that might come up with people talking about is the series of consistent quality, and for me it basically was in terms of my enjoyment. I enjoyed all of the books, greatly. So anyway, it went from being not on my radar at all to being probably at this point, it might be in my top 10 favorite fantasy
Just,
series at this
just say
point.
it. Yes, just say it.
So
It's it is that. I've only read the first 4 books, but it is that good.
yeah.
It's good stuff, and I'll go through my thoughts a little bit down the line. But yeah, thanks. Anything else for your introductory thoughts, or move over to Paul?
No, no, I think that's about it for now. Yeah.
That'll get good, Paul. So a little bit about yourself and your expertise in fantasy
Thank you.
literature and your connection to Tales of Alvin Maker.
Yeah, so I'm Paul Williams. I am a so I have a PhD in English, and I specialize in fantasy literature. And so this series and I go back to 2012 is when I read the first couple. My best friend had heard about them in when we were in undergrad together, and so I got him the first few books for his birthday, and then I borrowed them from him, and I tore through those first two in the summer of 2012. Great time, and then I just kind of let it go. And part of that is because, so like Card, I am myself a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or which is part of the broader umbrella of Mormonism. And the series very much engages with church history. And at the time, I kind of was like, oh, like this is kind of Mormon Narnia. And for some reason, I kind of, yeah, and I kind of let it be at the time, and then a few years later, when I was moving to grad school, I was shuttling between the city where I was teaching high school at the time and Pocatello, Idaho, where I am now, for which is where I went to Idaho State University, and that's a quite the drive. And so I got the latter books, an audio book, and I burned through those, and that's when I started realizing that Card is doing something vastly more sophisticated than I had originally given him credit for. This is one of my favorite series. I mean, Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea will always be my favorite series, I think. And if I count Book of the New Sun as one book and not a series, uh, I think this or Mythago would are my next are my number two and number three favorite series. Um, and then when I was ready back in 2019, 2020, I was getting ready to I just come up with a dissertation topic, and I I knew I wanted my goal was to do some scholarship on Susanna Clark's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And then I was like, wait a second, that's an alternate history fantasy, and Alvin Maker's alternate history fantasy. And so I did a dissertation on kind of the poetics and the structures of alternate history fantasy
Mm.
literature. And Alvin Maker constitutes the last chapter of the dissertation of the major discipline of the main of the project proper, and it yielded one of my major publications, which I believe I sent to Jay already. Maybe you can put that in the show notes or something like that. Um, and yeah, so this series for me is very special because first of all, it's just what it's engagement in with the fantasy genre in general, particularly at its time in history, is really important. Also, it's very important to note that Seventh Son was published in 1987, the year I was born. So this series and I seem to be inseparably interconnected in that regard. But also the way that oh, sorry.
Was there a torch out there watching over your birth from a distance too?
I have to assume that's the only explanation, Jay. No, and but also the way that I appreciate how Card. This is a very incisive piece about American history as well as Mormon history, and those two are very much entangled with each other. And we can probably talk more about that as we go along. I should also mention I am not an official spokesman for the church. I'm just a guy who has thoughts. That's all.
Very good, very good. So it just occurs to me, I kind of jumped into backgrounds with the series. I will maybe just give just in case there is somebody who's watching this who hasn't seen a prior video about the series or have any knowledge of it. I'll give my short spiel about it. I think Tales of Alvin Maker is a brilliant example of why categorizing books into ironclad separate genres can sometimes be a mistake, because you've got historical fiction, you've got alternate history, you've got fantasy, you've got folklore and mythology, you've got Americana, you've got, so that's what, at least five different genres all meshed into one here in this excellent series that's set in, I don't know if I was ever able to pin down an exact date, but it seems to be early 1800s alternate America.
Yeah.
So you've got, it's in America where the Revolutionary War went very differently than what we find in our textbooks, because you've got the crown colonies and slavery in the South. You've got New England and the United States in the North. You've got Appalachia. Lots of interesting names in this kind of alternate history versions of American names. Appalachia in the Central, Wabash, Ohio, which is Ohio. Yeah, thank you. There's like a good fantasy book. There are excellent maps that accompany these and help you kind of follow along here. But ultimately, the story follows the progression of young Alvin Maker, or Alvin Miller, becomes known as Alvin Maker, who has these, is the seventh son of the seventh son, as the first book title indicates, has these just amazing amalgamation of folk magic powers known in the story as different knacks. Like, you think, well, which is kind of funny. It's such a common saying. Well, you
Yeah.
have a knack for doing this. You have a knack for doing that. Well, Card turns that saying into and makes it into actual, folk magic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So, but Paul, you raise an interesting point in your statement about how this series is steeped in symbolism and uh, of in connection to Mormon beliefs, Mormon events that
Yeah.
connected the life of Joseph Smith. I is am and people sometimes call me the hardcore Lutheran. I am pretty staunch and but I'm also kind of well versed in Catholic and Orthodox traditions of Christianity. So we would not be, no mystery here. We would not be on the same page as to theological things, but I nevertheless found um, the series to be very, very entertaining and not an obstacle for me at all. And I'll get into that more. But Paul, I want to have Sam talk a little about that too, from his background. But Paul, did I cut you off? And if your
No.
introduction, okay. So Sam, how would you say, even though this series is known for being sort of the alt history life of Joseph Smith, a kind of tale steeped in folk magic and Americana and all that, how is you, as not someone not connected to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, how did you interact with that, or did that affect your enjoyment of it all of it?
Yeah. Maybe it helps that I'm rather ignorant of the broader history around Joseph Smith. There's a lot of broad sweeps that I think people you just pick up through cultural religious osmosis. But certain things like the detail of him being and Paul can correct me here, but him being injured as a boy in the leg and then having a surgery where he refused to take alcohol to help numb the pain, and Alvin Miller experiences something very similar. Some of those details were lost on me until hearing about it after the fact. So I guess for people who hear us talking about their spiritual themes, their our religious themes, it's, to me, as somebody who's not particularly well versed in the beliefs of Mormons or the LDS Church, um, it came much it came off much more to me as being thought provoking about spiritual ideas rather than, say, like, doctrine. So
Yeah.
for people watching this who are familiar with say, like, the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio, or even, I would say, Book of the New Sun by Wolf, those are much more explicit with their Catholicism in the worldview of the authors, I felt like, than in my opinion, than Card was with his beliefs. Or take, like, Philip Pullman. Philip Pullman is much more in your face once again, in my opinion, than say Card is. So for people who are like, well, I'm not interested in being preached at or getting a history or theology lesson in Mormonism, this is very much a fantasy adventure series in the tradition of The Name of the Wind. Paul mentioned A Wizard of Earthsea. The boy who has way more magical powers and abilities than he has any right to have, and what is he going to do with that? Can this be turned to a higher cause? And also, how does he figure out what that right cause is in the face of a bunch of chaos, whether it's from supernatural evil or political forces and political upheaval that's all around him? It's much more about that than it is any type of I don't know, dogmatic point that Card's wanting to hit readers over the head with.
Right, right. I think, and Paul, you alluded to your article. I think that that's really when I thought of why I'm enjoying this story so much, which is connected to the founding of the Mormon faith and Latter Day Saints. And I'm not finding that a hindrance at all to my enjoyment of it in any way. And I think your article hit down that for me when you wrote about how Card wrote this in a style where he wasn't using these stories as a setup to establish a church in his alternate history setting, or establish dogma, or establish what you normally associate with a established religion. He was connecting these stories with the um, um, folk stories, folk
Yes.
magic, those kinds of things. So that's what I appreciated. So I'll just kind of throw it open now to eat Paul, if you wanted to expand on that, or Sam, you wanted to respond to that as well, it'd be fine. Maybe let Paul go first.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with a quote from an interview with a criminally underread author, Sean Stewart, one of my favorites, who sadly, due to poor sales, was kind of forced into retirement very early. Um, but his novels are amazing. And in this interview, he was talking about his novel Cloud's End, and he says, this is from, I think this is from 98, 99, something like that. He says, I began Cloud's End with the idea that all truly great works of fantasy are sourced in a moral and indeed religious vision. The Catholicism that underpins The Lord of the Rings, the neo-pagan roots of the Mists of Avalon, the equilibrium-oriented indigenous religious vision that informs A Wizard of Earthsea, uh, possibly borrowed from Ursula Le Guin's Anthropologist Father. And so uh, I I think I agree with that. I think this is why fantasy has always been so natural to me. Is I think I have I've always had a magical worldview that's steeped in my religious upbringing, um, and the religion that I continue to embrace and live to the best of my abilities, at least. And I think what Card is doing actually is a very important spiritual project. He's not trying to promote faith, nor is he trying to critique faith. I think he's very much he's doing something adjacent to what Wolf does in Book of the New Sun. Wolf talked a lot about how he just had all these different ideas. About, he was like just like, well, who is Jesus, and what is the relationship between God and man, and how do all these things come together? And I think Card is very much. This is from. Let me back up a bit. So a bit of background on this. So uh, the 80s and early 90s are what I refer to as kind of Card's Mormon period. And his father at the time was the official historian, or sorry, his father-in-law was the official historian of the church. And this was a time when a lot of church history documents, there was a lot of effort to kind of like control have a hegemonic or hegemonic narrative about church history and whatnot. And so like, you went to Sunday school and we all heard the exact same version of events. And Card was his father-in-law gave him access to all these articles and documents. And he's like, wait, this is like not how that was. And so there's a lot of his fiction throughout the 80s and the early 90s are him, I think, trying to make sense and not like in a scandalous way, just like, okay, if here's like all this stuff that complicates how we understand it, rather than a simplistic get born, be a good kid, stay in the church, die, and go to heaven. Um, that's that. This is that's a narrative that tends to very much leave people dissatisfied pretty quickly,
Mhm.
and you hemorrhage a lot of members of a church because that's not enough for them. And so then you get weirdos like three of us who really want to understand, like we want to dig into like what does this commandment from Jesus mean, or what does how do we make sense of the book of Judges because that's weird, or what have you. And I think that's very much what Card is trying to do. He's trying to say, okay, regardless of uh, whether or not Jesus is real, whether or not Joseph Smith really a prophet, all this, that, and the other, what do we make of all the just like these doctrines and teachings, these
Mhm.
at the very least moral philosophies, and how do they connect to do they connect to a sort of natural order of the universe? And so he has this. It's this whole series. I look at it very much as Card trying to dialogue with established narratives of faith in order to better understand how to more effectively and authentically live faith.
Right. So Paul made a mention earlier in the stream to like, oh, like Mormon Narnia, and like, okay, like Narnia is obviously a very different project than what C.S. Lewis is doing
Yeah,
here, and I almost hesitate to bring up Narnia because of how much people just write it off as like cheap allegory, and I think there's a big
yeah,
conversation that can be had there. But what see, but because the thing that people forget about Narnia is that Narnia is chock full of pagan images and ideas, which is like bizarre if you're thinking of like, oh, good Queen Christian allegory, and it's like literally the series ends with the spoilers with the god Jupiter showing up and like
really.
ending the world. Well, that's who Father Time is
Oh,
is it's the god Jupiter. It's like,
I've only read the first three.
okay, so yeah, so Father Time ends up at the end of the series. Sorry, Paul, but like
No,
it ends with this
I wasn't
like
going to.
this what would be seen at first glance is like a very pagan idea. It's like, what is this doing here? And what Lewis is trying to do is something akin to what to use the Jungian term, and I don't even know if I'm using it right, but the King Arthur stories coming from some sort of like collective unconscious of the English
Yeah,
Isles, of this merging, this integration of the Christian religion that's appearing on the English islands, and also the old pagan roots that are deep inside of the land. There's something of there's something going on in the King Arthur stories that's something like trying to reconcile those two things. And I see like
mm,
Narnia as being like a very, sorry, this is not a talk about Narnia, but like Narnia is like a very conscious attempt on Lewis to try to do that with the Christian myth, as he calls it, but then also the pagan myths that he loves so much for what they can represent. And I see Alvin Maker is actually kind of akin to King Arthur or
yeah,
Narnia, if you will, in the sense of it's Card taking both elements of um, religion, and then we could take, Mormonism as being the prominent one since he
yes,
specifically borrows elements from Smith's life. But he's trying to reconcile that as alongside, uh, the American folk myth and also American history, like you talked about, because
yes,
a lot of the history in here is not real history. Like it's kind of
no,
flipped. It's kind of turned on its head. It's like Napoleon is in America, but also you've got real historical characters like Tenskwatawa and Tecumseh and John Adams and William Henry Harrison. Um,
yeah,
and so I think that makes it a much more interesting project than just like, oh, we're talking about one thing. Oh, this is just alternate fit history. Oh, this is just playing with folk magic. Oh, this is
yes.
just religion. There's something bigger in the reconciliation of those things within the book.
I completely agree. And this is very much yeah, and all these things are in dialogue, and nothing fits exactly onto any one thing, right? Like Alvin certainly has these episodes of Joseph Smith history playing out, but they are so uh broken up, repurposed, twisted, altered in some way, shape, or form, and they are not consistent. Like, there's plenty of stuff that Alvin does that just has no correlation anywhere to Joseph Smith history at all. Uh, and yet still there's this broader picture that keeps coming back to. But that allows Card again to be working on this level of invention and critique as he keeps these different narratives, these meta narratives. Really, he's got American history, church doctrine, which is different from church history. He's got kind of the familiar Joseph Smith history that I learned in Sunday school as a little kid, versus the stuff that was not so widely available in the 80s and 90s, even to biographers, while also tackling uh, both the myth and the actuality of American history. Let me give an example of this. What I mean by that. So there is a mythic history of the United States. I mean, if uh, I roll my eyes often the Sunday of Fourth of July, because almost inevitably someone is going to get to the pulpit and they'll mention uh, the totally not factual story of George Washington at Valley Forge, and he goes and he prays and promises God that he will make this Christian nation, and therefore we have to be Christian nationalists, right? And I roll my eyes a lot at that. And it's not true, it's not real, but it is so potent in the American imagination, especially in '87. That's the height of the Reagan era, and the resurgence of American conservatism. And so Card has this whole conversation in the first book where Alvin is talking with Tail Swapper, who's kind of our Gandalf character, and uh, they talk about a story very much like this, unmistakably like this in their history. And Alan's like, yeah, George Washington, in this case, Lord Potomac, was praying. And Tail Swapper responds, it says, well, we don't know if he prayed. He probably did pray on occasions, but we don't know. But basically, Card is critiquing this simplistic nationalist narrative while also claiming that narrative for mythic material to take place in his story. And so you've got these two, you have Mormon myth and lore and American myth and lore, which are both being linked to actual historical materials. And those are all four get distilled down into an alternate history fantasy that is also has its own identity.
Right. I think the pattern that both of you are talking about fits exactly with something that kept coming to mind as I was reading through the first four books that I finished. Is Card is constantly holding differing things in tension with one another.
Yes.
In the first book, Seventh Son, just as an example, I'll just kind of walk through briefly what I have in mind here. This kind of goes back to your point, Sam, about the incorporation of pagan or mythic elements into kind of intersecting them with a more established Christian narrative. First book, the tension was all about, you've got these hardcore Calvinist Presbyterians, Reverend Philadelphia Thrower and Armor of God Weaver, just great names. If nothing else, you should read this story because of the great names involved.
Verily Cooper.
Verily Cooper, yes, who's
the twins, waste not, want not.
Waste not and want not. Just phenomenal names in this story.
Adi, I got some baby names. Write them down.
That's right. All right, right. Yeah, I don't have grandkids yet, but now I could give them my kids some suggestions for when they have their own kids. So you've got the first book. You've got this Miller family and all their kids, and all the things that they do, the hexes, and the other aspects of the knacks that they each have. And you've got Peggy, the torch that I alluded to earlier, that was there at the birth of Alvin, looking onward from a distance. You got dowsers, who are these abilities to deal with water and etc. And what's the just extreme tension within families about how to deal with that issue of this folk magic versus this kind of Christianity which utterly rejects any of that kind of thing going on within that narrative, which kind of goes back to it relates to your talk about Narnia in that sense of can can elements of paganism interact with Christianity? We get that debate every Christmas and Easter, and at least
Oh my gosh.
to ad nauseum. Which, yeah, I have the same reaction you do. Um, but that's the tension of that first book. The second book, you got the, the second and the third books, for me at least, were first book was kind of this whimsical, sometimes exciting, dark territory, but second and third books really got into really deep, dark territory of American history, which goes back to your point,
Yeah.
Paul, about how Card doesn't shy away from getting into uncomfortable aspects of American history here. Of course, in the second book, The Red Prophet, you've got the dealing with the interaction between these settlers and these communities with Native Americans and how that intersected with the political machinations at the time. Third book, you've got deals head on with slavery and slave owners, having sexual relations with their slaves in order to create um, the new life that they could control in a horrific way. And the fourth book kind of took a veer into a legal thriller, which,
Yeah.
as a recovering lawyer, I actually enjoyed immensely. But so kind of all those, so yeah, tensions between settlers and natives, so, between whites and the slave population and those issues. It's constantly holding that in tension, and I think pulled it off pretty well for at least for what I've read so
Yeah.
far. Anyway, so anyway, I've talked for a little bit. Thoughts on
Oh,
that?
yeah, no, I would completely agree with you there, Jay. And what's I have a few thoughts on that. So one is, you say there's kind of this tension about how there's this magic, but we also have, you know, these different Protestant groups and whatnot. And so while I was doing my dissertation, I came upon, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, a study from about the time that Card was writing this book about the role of folk magic in early American Christianity. And, this is like at the time in the early 19th century, and this was like in the time of Joseph Smith, folk magic was just so deeply folded into daily life. I mean, people believed in foresight through seeing stones, water dowsing, uh, hexes, and all these things come hithers. Uh, and that was just seen as as a means of tapping into a magical worldview, really, or expressing a magical worldview. And so, Card, like a lot of the magic here, is very much linked and not beholden unto, but is very much linked to aspects of these folk magics. He actually at one point had to hire a folklorist grad student to do some research for him. But again, it was never a matter of like, okay, well, here's how they did it, and so he's going to do it exactly that way. He finds out about it and he folds it into the story. So this is an existent tension from the historical material, not just something that Card is imposing. Um, and that kind of brings us to one of the things that I adore about this series is the stakes are much more spiritual than existential, I would say. Like there is, so might be worth mentioning. So Alvin is opposed by this non-entity called the Unmaker that doesn't seem to have physical form. Um, and doesn't really fit into a Satan role either. At least I don't think. My best friend and I argue about this. I don't feel the Unmaker is Satan, and some of the characters here don't either. But it's just this force of just entropy. It just wants to unravel things, and you
It's like
oppose it.
chaos.
Yeah, and so you oppose it through acts of deliberate, intentional creation. And so it's much more concerned with how we do that rather than achieving some ultimate victory at some point. For me, one of the most shocking scenes, I think, is early in the third book when uh, Alvin he's an apprentice at a blacksmith and he's upset. His pride has been offended. He's 12 years old. His pride has been affronted, and he's supposed to dig a well, and he starts doing it the wrong way, and he starts abusing his knack to do it. and it nearly destroys him. But the stakes are much more, again, internal, and it's about his, I don't know how to say salvation, but certainly his spiritual well-being is the real concern here. And I find that actually in many ways much more rewarding and relatable than fighting the Dark Lord in whatever form that may take.
Right, right. There aren't. I mean, there's action in this series. There's some fights, and there's some um, big events that do take place,
Yeah.
particularly in the towards the end of the second book, Red Prophet. But yeah, a lot of the tension, a lot of the excitement comes from these very interpersonal, dilemmas and battles between the two of them. Sam,
Yeah,
what do you think?
for people who say they like character driven fantasy, it's like, okay, this is like, that's what this is, that's what card is going for here. And just to touch on something that both of you guys have talked about with this integration of all these different elements, yet another part that's on top of it that's fun is that and Paul mentioned this, is that card is also playing with like fantasy as a genre here. There is a handful of numbers of clear like tips of the hat to Tolkien and to Tolkien's work in this series, which is a good bit of fun. When I was talking with Steve Donahue just recently, this series came up, and one of the things that he mentioned was that the Native Americans kind of serve as like elves in this story in the same way, or rather, they serve the same function in this story as elves do in Lord of the Rings. Where you've got elves that are a little bit more connected to the land. They have a magic that comes from Middle Earth itself. And in the same way, the Native Americans in the Alvin Maker series, they have a different type of magic than the Knacks that, say the settlers have, or from the type of magic that the Africans have who have been brought over to America. It's a little bit different. And even that one scene where, oh, you guys will have to help me. Which is the one native character who goes into Alvin's bedroom and confronts him in that one scene?
Lalawasiki / Tenskwatawa.
Yeah, Tenskwatawa.
The Shining
Like
Man. Mm-hmm.
that scene specifically, I felt like as I thought about it more, I was like, oh, that's almost reminiscent of the Mirror of Galadriel sequence in
Mm.
Fellowship of the Ring. Where it's sort of like a defining of like, okay, here's the quest that's laid before you. You need to understand what a great burden it is, and here's a character that is an ally, but is almost presented in a shining and terrible form because you need to understand just how serious the situation is and how
Mm.
serious the power is that's been placed on you. So, yeah. So even if the fantasy and the folk magic and folk traditions and the religion stuff isn't enough to hook you, there's some cool like playing around with the fantasy genre that happens here too. And as Jay says, it's a fantasy series that's not the primary threat is not can we punch enough orcs in the face? Can we kill a dragon? Can we overthrow the evil emperor? It's not about can we be violent enough to do the thing. Um, like what Paul said, it's a much more spiritual, it's a much more soul threat or stakes that we're dealing with here. Um, yeah, I've got probably some more thoughts on that, but I'll leave it at that for
Right,
now.
right. So I think um, let's talk a little bit more. So I because I'm not a very good host, I did not mention at the beginning of this video that the first part would kind of be generally non-spoilery. Jay, now generally, and we've done a good job at that so far. Um, so I want to kind of talk about any other general thoughts you have about the series. And I think, Sam, you had some great ones there about the connection of this series to the fantasy genre as a whole, on how it goes along with some of it, but also inverts a lot of it, I think, and breaks new ground in a lot of ways. And I think talk a little bit about, since this is a series, and one of the things you mentioned to me, Paul, when you first reached out to me about it, is it's these, of course, mass market paperbacks are dead now, but you have to basically get used copies of this on eBay, or you get an e-reader, or else there are some combination omnibus editions, I think, of some of them There's some audio
Yeah.
out there, but these aren't books you can just go to Barnes and Noble at this point and buy. You have to research out a little bit for it. Hopefully, with the seventh and final book coming out soon, Master Alvin, there will be some additional published editions coming out. But I think I just want to ask both of you as maybe some final non-general, non-spoiler thoughts on what would be your pitch for a reader to pick up this series, particularly given that now that it's going to be a series that's going to be finished. Unlike some fantasy series, which shall not be named, but you know what they are, that aren't finished. So let's see, Sam talked last, so maybe Paul, why don't you and any other why you would recommend
Yeah.
the series to somebody, and any other thoughts you have before we move into spoilers.
Gosh. And so I guess first I do want to say like, and it is worth noting like a lot of people refuse to read Card on principle, and that's perfectly fair. They have every right to that. Um, Card's personal presentation has not been the most publicly agreeable for the past 25-ish years or so. He has said things and written things that, yeah, a lot of people find objectionable. So, first and foremost, if you just refuse to read Card on principle, I totally respect that. I get it. Uh, that being said, um, I think that this series, perhaps more than anything else he's written, in many ways, actually, I think what it presents, what it argues, is so contrary to the image a lot of people have of Card. And I'm not trying to say that this excuses what he has said. I'm just saying that in many ways, I think it's probably part of what is one of the strangest things about Card is how his much of his fiction seems to be at odds with that public presentation of himself. Um, and he would have lots to say about that if he was here. Um, as for my pitch on the series, I think it is one of the most insightful and imaginative fantasies I've encountered. As Sam said, it's very, very character rich. It's not about here's your familiar archetypes, going through the familiar story, and I'll problematize your expectations once or twice. Like you really don't even know how to expect anything from this series. And the first book has a profoundly emotionally captivating climax that has to do with leg surgery. And by throughout each book, we are the concerns are about how do we as individuals build each other up and become our best selves. And how do we vanquish actual evil in our daily lives, really? And I think it's one of the most insightful for that.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Paul. Yeah. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know. I was debating. I was like, should I bring this up or not? And I will, just because I think it's maybe I've just thought of this as we've been talking. So who knows? Maybe I'm completely off base with this. But something that Paul said made me think that in a certain sense, the spiritual conflict at the heart of the series is a deeply Christian one, in the sense of following the example of Christ, which is Jesus taught that it is not just enough to not murder your brother. You shouldn't hate him. It's not just enough to not commit adultery. You shouldn't look with lust either. In other words, it's not just enough that you don't do bad stuff, but it's about the heart condition, and it's that your heart is not, if you want to put it this way, aligned with God. Um, and that lack of alignment is you missing the mark, is sin, and that sort of is magically represented in a certain sense in this series, which is interesting. So okay, that's not a very good pitch. If you want the cliche, like it's this meets this, like the best one would probably be Name of the Wind, unless you're somebody who hates Name of the Wind, in which case I'd say a Wizard of Earthsea meets like Last of the Mohicans. You'll get a lot of that. So for people who like history, for people who like coming of age type of stories, and for people who like something really different in terms of the way magic is explored, something that is very much not a hard magic system, but also you have a clear understanding of what the characters can and can't do, and how the magic works while still remaining mysterious in the story, yeah, then give the series a try. If people pass on it, I do think it's probably their loss if they don't at least try it. But that's my 2 cents on it. Like I said before, Card wasn't on my radar after reading him, and I mentioned to Jay. I'll just say this briefly because it's tangentially related to the Maker's stories. Um, I blew through the series. I loved it, as I already said. This last week, I picked up Lost Boys by Orson
Mm.
Scott Card, which, for as much as Alvin Maker was not on my radar, Lost Boys, this novel that isn't even a fantasy novel, it's maybe magical realism, like this like contemporary pseudo magical realism novel about a Mormon family living in North Carolina in the 80s, really wasn't on my radar. And sorry, this is fresh in my mind, which is why I'm bringing it up here, even though it
Yeah.
may seem like a bunny trail. I am not a very visual reader or emotional reader, like at all. Like I can't remember the last time I've cried at a book, and Lost Boys had me like break down sobbing over that book, and I've not had that happen in a very very long time. So when I consider I read Alvin Maker from beginning to end in December, and then Lost Boys this month, and so far it's the best book I've read this year. I'm sitting here being like, well, 7 out of the last, how many books over the last, 2, 3 months have been Card, and they've been amazing. Um, yeah, I might need to spend a little bit more time thinking about what that means. So I don't know, Jay. That's not a great pitch, but I did want to put in the 2 cents. If you haven't read Lost Boys, or if it's not on your radar, put it on your TBR. And I can talk about it more when it's on my channel, and I'm not wasting everyone's time. But it is a standalone, so you're not starting another big
Yeah.
series.
That's good to know. Good to know.
I need to read. I need to read that one still. That's the last of his major Mormon fictions that I haven't read yet.
Okay. So I think just to answer my own question, I would say just a few things. Um, Number one, I think, and again, I've talked about this event in the first book, Seventh Son, already, but 30 pages into the first book is one of the most gripping narratives I've ever read of the
Mm.
birth of Alvin. Again, you've got it doesn't involve a big battle, but involves just these cosmic forces almost surrounding the birth of a baby. When you've got a 6-year-old Torch Peggy looking on in a distance, who can magically see what's going on. You've got
And Alvin's brother.
Alvin's brother Vigor,
Mm-hmm.
and I won't. I don't know if that's a spoiler 30 pages into the book or not, but what happens to him surrounding the story and the water. Again, water connection there, and the just the depiction of the birth itself was just, gosh, that was just amazing, amazing stuff. So he can write so well, and just pulls you into a narrative that I don't know if I've ever felt that way from another author. To be honest, it was amazing. Second thing I would just pitch is each book is different. You're not just getting more of the same.
Yeah.
Again, as I mentioned, the first book, kind of this religious tension, folk magic, and in these other things, Christianity, and kind of figuring out who Alvin is and what this world is about, this alternate history world. Second book, you got the tensions between the Native American tribes and the settlers. I mean, it's also a very mystical book. Beautiful descriptions of mystical experience from Tenskatawa and others. And Alvin, of course, is brought into that. Third book, Prentice Alvin, the metaphysical book. You get into the subatomic level of figuring out what's
Mm-hmm.
going on with they call it the doodle bug, his ability to go in and figure out what's
Yeah.
going on, and to heal people, to influence things and all that, as well as the racial tensions in the book. And then the fourth book, as I mentioned before, Alvin Journeyman, kind of the legal thrill. Just I thought were amazing descriptions of courtroom scenes, but I perhaps got a little bit more out of that than the average reader as a recovering lawyer. But just great, great stuff. And I think just finally, then too, I think there's some great stories of redemption in the book. There's a mythological character in the book that shows up and is just a complete bully and jerk and bad guy, and is redeemed. And Alvin is such a great character, and he does the right thing, and just he yeah, it's just a great stories of redemption within the story. All right, so we're a little ways into the discussion here. I want to talk just give us a chance to talk about some more specifics. So anything else for the good of the order on here? I sound like a judge now. On non-spoiler territory.
I think we're
Okay.
good.
All right. So
Yeah.
you are watching the story and you think you're going to read it and you don't want no spoilers. This is probably a good time to stop because now we're going to go into spoilers. And I'm just going to add one more thing on about why I think Card is such a just an amazing writer. And I thought of this, Sam, when you were talking to Steve Donahue and I was watching your discussion with him. And you mentioned there's somebody that you knew that did not like Red Prophet at all. Um, and what I loved about Red Prophet, even though it goes very, very dark and very brutal, is how Card actually went there. And by went there, I mean at the end of the book, you keep waiting for the hero to come in and save the day.
That's right. Yeah.
And avoid
Oh
just
my
this
gosh.
brutal massacre of the Native Americans by this, William Henry Harrison, right? if I understood.
Yeah.
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 The Governor Harrison is organizing to organize this race war, basically. And you kept thinking Alvin's going to show up at the right time. He's gonna heal measure. They're going to show up in time. They're going to stop this race conflict and this massacre. And they didn't get there in time. And you've got thousands, I think in the thousands, just brutal. And I applaud Card, as hard as it was to read.
Yeah.
I applaud Card for not avoiding. I mean, those things happen. I've taken youth groups from my church to Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and gone to the site of Wounded Knee, and
Mm.
I've prayed at the site of where 500 Lakota are buried. They're just massacred, and so that stuff happened. And so I applaud Card for going there in his stories and not avoiding the hard stuff. But also, right, as hard as that was to read, and Sam, I know you also talked about the first part of the next book, which was also went into some difficult territory with the relations between the slave owner and the slaves in Prentice Alvin, and great. I mean, just hard stuff to read, but it happened, and I think I just applaud Card for dealing with it and not avoiding it. So that would be kind of my spoilerish version of why. Also, in case people are still watching, trying to decide to read this series, I think Card doesn't pull punches on American history, and which kind of goes back to your earlier point too about Paul, about that Card brings it in there and deals with it. So
He
anyway,
does.
that's so that I've gone on that for a while now. Thoughts on that, and feel free to go into whatever spoilers you want to at this point.
So I want to respond to that, James. I mean, maybe add on to that. I mean, Prophetstown was a real thing. This idea, Tenskwatawa was the local drunk who then had a spiritual epiphany, took on the name Tenskwatawa. I forget what that. It's something like the path then to the doorway or something like that is what it means.
He's a very famous figure, as I understand it, in terms of Native American history.
Yeah. In white American history, he tends to get greatly pushed to the sides by his more militant brother. But Provincetown became this place where alcohol and violence were explicitly forbidden, and Harrison did come in and did massacre the entire town. And so Card, what he does is he takes this moment from our history, and he's even got some of the original actors, historical actors present there. But what he does is he transforms it, and that's something that I love is how brilliantly he transforms it to make new meaning out of it. And let's think about this. This Card, he's doing this. Red Prophet is 1988, so it's published. Um, Card started his writing career actually began when he dropped out of a PhD in American Studies at Notre Dame in the early 80s. And Notre Dame actually has is where the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies is. Um, and this is very much in the Card's childhood is dominated by the events of the civil rights movement. And the Climax of Red Prophet, like, okay, I gotta say to what Sam was talking about with Richard, with Steve Donahue, like he's referencing a conversation that Sam and Richard from Two to Ramble had a couple weeks ago. I have no clue what Richard is talking about when he says that Red Prophet is preachy. I'm like, yeah, there are themes present, but Hyperion has themes also, and so I legitimately don't know. Like, I hope someday Richard can explain in some detail where that argument comes from because I don't understand it. Um, but what Card does is he takes this actual history, he wants to repurpose it, and this is actually a time where he does something very overtly and also kind of subtly Mormon. So there's a story in the Book of Mormon um, where a group of these ancient American Christians in the Book of Mormon have well they converted to Christianity. They this whole set of a kingdom of a previously wicked kingdom has converted to Christianity, and so their neighbors who are still the bad guys are disgusted by this, and so they come out to kill them. And so these new converts they rush out to meet them, and they prostrate themselves on the ground and pray as 1,000 of them are murdered. And uh, but as a result, it actually completely diffuses all the violence afterward because their neighbors who have been described as bloodthirsty are actually awakened to the horrors of their own wicked and depraved natures that they've embraced. And it's this amazing story about active nonviolent resistance. And Card channels that into this using more developed psychology from the studies about the civil rights movement and nonviolent resistance. It kind of invokes what Gandhi called satyagraha or kind of soul force or truth force. Um, and so all these different threads, it's a Mormon story entangled into that he entangles into an actual historical story combined with contemporary history filtered through a very specific uh, nonviolence lens that blends together to create this powerful way of saying, yeah, American history is bloody and it's full of all this genocide and colonialism, and here's a way to push back against that. And it's a way to, and so as a result, he creates this barrier of fog that, the settler says, okay, settlers, you got to keep everything east of Mississippi, you can keep it, but you can't come over here. And it's this amazing way, rather than just saying, well, we fix American history by getting rid of the white people. It's like we have to work through the conflict. We can't just magic it away. That would be too easy. Card is actually trying to figure out how do we deal with racial tensions.
Yeah.
And the phrases that like those people will say that in fantasy the metaphorical can become literal.
Yeah.
That Hannibal Lecter is not just metaphorically a red dragon in fantasy. Haha, we have a dragon.
Yes.
And in Red Prophet, like you get that. These people have blood on their hands. Haha, no, they like literally have like blood on their hands.
Yeah.
And it makes. Sorry, guys, I'm not trying to. Especially since
Go for
Jay's
it.
the actual preacher here. I'm not trying to preach here.
You preach it, brother.
What have I been doing this whole time?
it makes a bigger. It kind of reflects a point that Jesus makes, which is Jesus tells this parable, and in terms of traditional theological belief of like, okay, who gets to heaven or not, this is rarely brought into consideration when this is explicitly like what it's about in terms of who is a part of the kingdom of heaven. And it's the parable of the sheep and the goats. And
Mhm.
essentially what Jesus says is, did you see those who were hungry? Did you see those who were naked? Did you see those who were sick? And did you help them? And if you did that to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Enter into the kingdom. And if you didn't, then you're not a part of the kingdom. And I see that, and I don't know if Card's consciously reflecting on that, or making a point about that,
Oh, he
but
is.
I but I mentioned before we went live here that Card, in an interview that I saw with him, talked about how he got criticized for these books being anti-religious, and he cheekily said, "Well, like, I'm not criticizing my own religion, though, haha." And while that's like funny, there's a bigger point that's being made here of, it doesn't matter what creed you're saying that you believe in, or what label. It doesn't matter if you're saying Lord, 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 Lord. Many people will say that.
Hmm.
It matters about not just what you do, but where your heart's at as well. And so, in that sense, the settlers who, oh well, we've got the name of God, and we got the name of Jesus, and we've got the preacher marching behind us with his rifle as well, are less aligned with, and maybe that's why he calls it the maker and the unmaker, rather than, oh, God and the devil. Is he's trying to get you to think about it in a slightly different way, because in that moment, obviously the natives are much more aligned with the maker, um, than the bloodthirsty settlers are.
Hmm.
Yeah. This reminds me of uh, you guys might be interested in Card's collection, Folk of the Fringe. This is 4 or 5 novels or novellas and short stories in a post-apocalyptic North America that Card wrote throughout the 80s, um, and they all deal with some degree of a Mormon community in this scenario. And at the end, Michael Collings, who is certainly Card's most emphatic critic slash ally, he has this excellent afterword, and he says, so the last story is called America, and he says, speaking of the story America, he says, the Book of Mormon is a sine qua non of Mormonism, and its fundamental premise is the fulfillment of prophecy. America is the new promised land, and those who possess it do so with a responsibility for righteousness and worthiness. But in the world of the folk of the fringe, European Americans have abrogated that promise. The logical and inexorable corollary is that they have lost their right to the land itself. America deals with the strict and literal fulfillment of prophecy as the land itself raises up a new savior from among the Indians. Um, and so there's this element of Card saying, look, if we're going to make these claims, like, we can't just claim them so far as they're comfortable. We have to, like, he's trying to see them through to their logical execution, including to the detriment of the people who claim the privilege of those blessings in the first place.
Yeah, that's interesting insights there. Yeah. Um, any thoughts on that, Sam? You, um, or
Yes, but it's mostly about book 6. So
okay,
I will
very
not go
good.
into spoiler detail, out of respect for those who have not read book 6. But Paul, you saying
But
like
I'm not a
America.
reading machine like you are, Sam. But I have.
Yeah, Sam must die so that I can read faster. I don't know how that works, but I watch his Goodreads and I'm just like, well, I spent all January reading one novel, so
Right.
Well, I didn't say it was healthy. But in the Crystal City, you talked about there, Paul, the belief that America is, I forget the phrase you used, a new promised land, or
yeah, that's part of Mormon lore is that yeah, like this the New Jerusalem will be on the North American continent, and the church's relationship with that claim has vacillated over the past few years.
sure. But it's like that. I mean, that's like I said. I would just say that the Crystal City has a lot to say about that
Oh
idea,
yeah,
and using
very
a
much
lot of
so,
things from the Bible and ideas of promised land there,
very
in
much
that.
so.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, send me an email, Sam.
I'll catch up with you soon, and
Yeah,
we can perhaps reconvene another day. Um, so let's talk a little bit about some of the historical alternate history.
yeah,
Since we've talked about the real history of America and the connections to this alternate version of history which Card is creating here. Let's talk a little bit more about that, and we can do that now. Spoilerly, at least as to the first 4 books. again, I think we've talked in general about how lots of characters from both Americana and from actual history show up here, both in William Henry Harrison, uh, Tecumseh, um, other figures from Ben Franklin. Keeps getting alluded to as being a somebody who is not a maker necessarily, but at least somebody who had a very significant
Was he a wizard?
na- wizard.
Yeah, they call him
Something.
a wizard.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
like, I think they called him a wizard. I remember that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, wizard. Yeah, great. Yeah, interesting stuff there. Um, and then Napoleon. Once I think you get into the was it Red Prophet, the second or third book,
yeah,
you start to get into Napoleon
Yeah.
and the French
yeah.
Canada and other things of that nature. I enjoy as a history person. Again, I studied history in college and have gone on to read it and study it off and on over the years. I enjoyed that. Sometimes, again, I'm not necessarily qualified to give a literary critique of anything here. Just talking my own personal enjoyment of it. Sometimes I thought that's interesting stuff, but I kind of wanted it to get back. I was just I enjoyed the actual.
Mm,
I enjoyed Peggy and Alvin and the actual core group of the story that
yeah.
I want. Sometimes I just want let's just go back to them and
Mm,
enjoy more. That is a personal enjoyment factor. I'm from a history nerd perspective. I'm glad that stuff was there because it was interesting. But sometimes from a narrative standpoint, I wasn't always convinced that some of that exposition from Napoleon, for example, was necessary. But that what do I know? I don't know. So what did you think of the alt history um, stuff that kept showing up and it took me a while to kind of figure out what was going on too, to be honest.
mm.
What's where and who's in control of this territory and of course Harrison itself doesn't. He kind of I didn't figure out that was William Henry Harrison for a while because he kept being referred to as Bill Harrison, um,
Mm.
Governor Bill Harrison, and then finally they name him. I'm like, oh well, duh. Why didn't I figure that out? So anyway, what do you guys think?
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well, obviously, I just on the surface level, like it's just fun, some of how he plays with it. Um, it's interesting. It just struck me now that this will become more pronounced in books 5 and 6, Jay, but like a number of the historical figures that are being used are like presidents. So
Hmm.
William Henry Harrison, um, uh, Abraham Lincoln shows up later on in the series. John Adams shows up. I don't think he's in book 4. I think that's book
No,
5.
Adams is book 5.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And
Yeah,
then
Harrison
George
was elected
Washington.
president at the end of 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Which like like there's obviously reasons for it, since like that you talked about there, Paul, as to why Harrison is used, and some of that I didn't even put together. But it is funny that it's like he's elected president at the end of book 4, and like historically his presidency is just a big joke because he like died
Yeah.
like a month
30
later,
days.
which is
Hmm.
Yeah.
like,
Because
I
he
don't know,
got
maybe I shouldn't be
pneumonia
laughing
at his
about it, but
inauguration.
Right, right,
yeah,
right.
maybe I shouldn't laugh, but it is. I think it's a little humorous. It's like, well, guess we got to have another election. No, but yeah, I enjoy the alternate history stuff that he plays with. George Washington, I don't think shows up as a character, but his shadow looms large over the
Yes.
series, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, so alternate history very much, it very much trades on recognizability and alteration thereof, right? Like that is why you do alternate history, is you are somehow trying to dialogue with the past. You're trying to I I've argued in the past that alternate history has what I call a utopian impulse, either by showing us how history goes wrong in an effort to prompt us to choose right, or I think in Alvin Maker's case, trying to show us a better way through history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, what I think is interesting is how those alterations need to they need to provoke a logic in the reader, right? If you just have if Alvin's family, they set up a Vigor Church, and someone was like, you know, a letter came from Governor Jackson of Tennessee, Governor Andrew Jackson of Tennessee, and that's all it ever was. That's not really telling us a whole lot. That's not saying anything about history or about our relationship to the story of our past. Um, and so to the fact that to the Harrison example that Sam just gave us, like William Henry Harrison has two great claims to the modern American consciousness. Uh, Being a raving, aggressive colonialist who perpetrated the massacre of Tippecanoe and dying on 30 days into his presidency because he got sick at his inauguration. Both of because we don't really know like your average American or anyone doesn't really know Harrison beyond those two details. I didn't even know about Tippecanoe till I read the series, actually. Um,
I just knew it from the saying "Tippecanoe and Tyler too." That was his
yeah,
slogan
it,
for his campaign. Yeah.
yeah, and I never even heard of that part. Like because he just grazed over him in school when I was there. And so that is his mythic image, and fantasy is about the reorganization of myth. And so what Card does is he plays true to that. Well, the same and Harrison's death is what triggers all these questions about wait, how does the vice presidency work? Because the original Constitution doesn't actually say that the vice president ascends to the presidency. It just says they vice president shall take upon himself the rights and responsibilities of the presidency. And so it's when Harrison dies, it's like, Tyler, do are you president? We're not certain actually. And so Card manages to revisit that question in a very different context by having Andrew Jackson as the vice president, whereas in his actual history, Jackson tried to keep Harrison from becoming president. All these different things getting twisted around and refashioned to bring us back to these essential questions in this story about what is America about? How does it work? How to make it better? And what are the pitfalls we run into? And so, a small spoiler for Jay, like John Adams is in the next book. He's a judge, which if John Adams wasn't going to be a founding father and later president, what else? What other trajectory is natural to John Adams other than being a high judge, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this element of engaging the myth, the cultural the myth that exists in our cultural consciousness, shooting that through with actual history while also reshaping it in ways that lead us back to these other questions. I think back to what Jay was saying earlier. I'll close with this. I wonder, Jay, if we had a trimmed down a Thomas Jefferson version of Alvin Maker, as it were,
Yeah.
with those little side bits excised or at least in a different color ink. I bet you that we would all be wondering, wait, what is America doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'll agree that those can at times feel a little bit ancillary, but for me, they always are wonderful flavoring, and I think he does them judiciously, because he wants this to be the story of America, and he's trying to be very conscious that America is more than one person, right? It's one of the greatest pitfalls I think we've had in past my lifetime, right? Is that it's always like these elections turn into, these savior creation machines, right?
Mm-hmm.
FDR is the hero from the Great Depression. JFK is the hero who was gone from us too soon. Obama was supposed to be the great savior of America. This is something we keep happening over and over again. And I think the whole story very much uses the alternate history to tell us that no, America doesn't work. It doesn't turn on the hinges of individuals. It really is more on single individuals. It's collective individuals together.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to be gleaned from the story. I think as I'm thinking back to, I'm thinking of, since book 4 is the one that I most recently read, Alvin Journeyman. I think the whole kind of side trip of Calvin to France with Napoleon, I kind of wonder what was going on there, or why are we doing it for a while and taking up time. That once I kind of figured out that Napoleon's knack was.
Hmm.
His knack was, in making friends and influencing people, like to follow him to death if need be, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and how he and Calvin were kind of had this trade off relationship where Calvin was healing him of his gout and all that. I thought that was
Hmm.
interesting and fun.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if it was worth all the bandwidth of the space and the narrative for that. But I wanted to get back to the courtroom scenes that I was enjoying. Anyway, Sam, what I don't know if I've given you the floor for a while to talk about any kind of those historical uh, anything to respond to Paul, what Paul or I have said, or about the historical alt history parts of it.
Yeah, I forgot, and I'll just say this. I think this is probably the thing I am most interested to see because I think it's still left up in the air in Master Alvin that I want to see when the series ends is where everything's going with the character of Calvin. Um, man, what a fascinating foil to Alvin. Where because of now that we're in spoiler territory, we can say
Yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
Calvin is also a seventh son of a seventh son, and is sort of like the evil version of Alvin. Although that's an oversimplification. I get that, but it creates the it creates a biblical feeling to the story because especially and maybe I should be more specific a Genesis feeling through the story because um, the book of Genesis is it would not be inaccurate to say that the book of Genesis is a book of rivalries between brothers.
Mm-hmm.
It opens with Cain and Abel, and then you have Isaac and Ishmael, and you have Jacob and Esau, and then you've got
Esau.
Joseph and his brothers, and yeah, and so like you have that in this story with Alvin, and then with Calvin as well, and yeah, I don't know. I'll be interested to see where that
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah. Again, I don't know where that goes in books 5 and 6, but I will say, yeah, that the scene where he just does whatever he to tail swapper is like, wow, that
Yeah.
just kind of seemed to come out of like, oh, I guess
Yeah.
you kind of get a glimpse at the end of book 3. I think that Calvin was going down a different path, and
Yeah.
when he was kind of starting to fight back against Alvin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then the beginning of the fourth book, I think it was just
Yeah. It's
wow,
the
wow,
prologue. Yeah.
right, right, right.
Well, Calvin fascinates me in part because he is in the core cast. He is the character who doesn't have a clear historical corollary. So Alvin does have lots of connections to Joseph Smith, Peggy to Joseph's wife Emma, Arthur Stewart to Brigham Young, though Brigham Young was not a black freeman. Um, Verily Cooper to Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith's scribe. Measure to Hiram Smith, Joseph's older brother. Like anyone familiar with Mormon history will recognize these connections. Calvin has no such corollary. Um, and he is very much this foil to Alvin, and I think that it's worth I don't know if this will satisfy you, Jay, but to the Napoleon and Calvin stuff, like Card is very much trying to talk about uh how to, I guess, distribute power in a
Mhm.
society and how a society can function. In this way, I guess it's kind of taking cues from Dune, right? That if you have singular hero messiah characters, they eventually become part of a machine that just chews everyone up in the process. So in Apprentice, Alvin, we have uh, this part where Peggy is this is right after Alvin has the well digging scene that I think is amazing. Um, she says Alvin has to learn what to change other men only by persuasion and long suffering, gentleness and meekness, unfeigned love and kindness. And then the end throughout Crystal City they talk about this as well. Like a maker is someone who convinces atoms and people who want to change on their own. And I can't remember if it's in Red Prophet or in Journeyman, but there's the comment about how Napoleon is someone who uh, exerts for he makes people, he bends their will to like him, so he seizes loyalty that he has no right to have. And so that is the ultimate tension in the series, is how does society work? How can you build utopia if how do you build it without it collapsing in on itself through egomania and uh, various ways that pride manifests? And he's like, you just got to have a society where everyone literally just loves each other and loves themselves enough that no one's competing with each other. Um, and it's worth noting that Tecumseh was actually called the American Napoleon, actually, by Europeans.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so Alvin is trained by Tecumseh in the Green Song, and like Alvin is taught uh, man-made politics by Napoleon. In other words, Alvin's ethics come from discovering how the universe works and then figuring out how to refract that throughout humanity. And Calvin is about how do man-made structures work and how can I use cosmic forces to enforce that.
Hmm. Very interesting. Thank you for that.
Mm.
I think I kind of speed read through some of some of the last book to get done in time
Yeah.
for the
Oh,
discussions. I might go back and reread some of that with that in mind. Thank you.
yeah.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Um, Napoleon, such a complex historical figure, great leader, not necessarily, great man, um, but certainly a great leader, and had all. And so you certainly get some insights into him via Card's narration through Calvin and that storyline. So that is interesting. Another thing, Sam, I want to give you a chance to respond to that if you have anything. But uh, you also, in kind of your list of characters based upon real life characters, you talked about Peggy and being an analog to Joseph Smith's wife. And I want to come back to I don't look for romance I've never read a romantasy book, and I don't think I ever will. But I think it's important to talk a little bit about romance when it does come up in fantasy. But I want to
Yeah.
come back to that in a bit. Um,
Don't think you will. Don't speak too soon, Jay. If that don't
oh,
look like romantasy, I don't know what does.
Uh,
oh,
I mean, it's called Heartfire.
can I skip books 5 and go straight to 6 and 7? I don't know.
Five has some good stuff. Five is my least favorite, but it's still, I think, it's a really
Yeah.
good book. Um, it's got some good stuff.
Okay. Well, what I actually was going to say was that from the romance parts of it so far in it, particularly the how by the end of book 4, again, spoiler territory, that Peggy and Alvin do get married. Um, I have found this is one of the fantasy series where I have not found the romance to be cringe. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed how he wrote that story and how it was seemed so, I don't know, just genuine, real life. I mean, they had mixed emotions through this whole process and complicated by their knacks, their gifts of folk magic, where they kind of, she can see into other people's hearts and know what they're thinking. Alvin
Yeah.
obviously has all of his gifts that go along with that, and how that intersects and how do you make a relationship out of that. I thought this was very well done. So if it's more of
Yeah.
that than Heartfire, I'm all for it.
And
I
Jay,
think you'd be
Heartfire
pleased.
is also another courtroom story.
Yeah.
It's a little different. It's done from a bit of a. I actually like it as a book more than Alvin Journeyman. I actually like that's my one big like hot take about Alvin Makers, that I actually liked Heartfire more than I think most fans of the series
Mm.
did.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you like the lawyering stuff though, I mean, there's more to come.
Well, Verily Cooper is. If I had to pick a single favorite character out of this series so far, I think it might be him. Just this
Verily's
fantastic,
great.
witty British guy shows up in the middle of, you know, settler America, and just is
Yeah.
I don't normally read legal stuff for fun, but when it's really
Yeah,
well done and enjoyable, I love it. So then I love that one.
yeah. Riley's definitely one of my favorites too.
Yeah, yeah. So we've kind of been going at this a little over an
Yeah.
hour now, and getting to be at the time we're recording this, close to old Matt. Since I know I'm way older than Sam. I'm older than you, Paul. Too. I'm not sure where you fall between us, but um, it's getting to be my
I think you mean
bedtime.
you're older than these books, what you're saying.
Oh, I do know how old you, because you said you were born in 1987. Well, okay,
Yes.
I was a senior in high school in 1987, so
Ah,
that gives you a. But somehow these books evaded my attention at that point in time,
yeah.
because I was more worried about other things, I suppose. Final thoughts, whatever, about about any of these books, whether spoiler or non-spoiler, that we haven't talked about yet. Again, with it looking ahead to Master Alvin, and maybe I would close with that. Any final thoughts, and you know, whatever you can say about what you hope that Master Alvin might deal with. And Paul, or Sam, you've already dealt with that a little bit, but if there's anything else you want to say about that, go for it.
Well, do you mind if this isn't really a final thought thing as much as it is a
Mm-hmm.
question that I wanted to ask you guys since
Mm-hmm.
you've read it. Um, I talked about this with Paul a little bit in an email, but the big like magical talisman item, the big like magical center of the series besides Alvin is this plow that he creates in book three.
Mm.
So I guess what I'm wondering is like in a greater sense, like why a plow? What do you think is symbolically significant about that, and why Card writes it with that at the center of the books?
So the plow is not only just it's a plow; it's living. It's gold. It's a product of Alvin's, unique combination of gifts. Um, why a plow instead of a threshing machine or whatever? I mean, whatever, whatever. That's a good question. Um, I mean,
Because
certainly,
it almost is
uh,
as I said that I realized it's almost like a foil to the traditional like Elric sword. Or there's a similar
Hmm.
thing in Warbreaker
mhm.
where it's like the living sword, but it's got a demon and it eats souls, and it almost is like a play on that type of thing.
Well,
I would agree.
beating swords into plowshares.
Oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
I
Duh.
just
Leave it
no.
to the pastor. Uh,
Yeah, I wrote a dissertation chapter. I never realized that particular connection. Thank you, Jay. Uh,
I
yeah.
wouldn't.
Well,
I hadn't thought of it until you kind of set it up and
yeah.
gave me the easy pitch, and I figured it out. So it's yeah. I mean, if I think that's as likely as any.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I think that's almost exactly it, right? Because so, I mean, Mormonism, or at least Joseph Smith's story, is very much bound up in the question of basically of American utopia. Um, yeah, Joseph Smith dies in 1844 in Carthage, Illinois. He is the mayor of the city of He's led the foundations of the city called Nauvoo, which today is very small and kind of remote, and only Mormons actually care about it. Uh, um, but it was Joseph was very concerned about like how do I create a purely equitable society because this is the time when I think there are hundreds of American utopian movements throughout the first half of the 19th century that all fail pretty quickly. They try collectivism, they try various philosophical foundations and political structures and economic systems, and they just keep collapsing right and left. So Joseph is trying to figure out how to make this work, and that's that quote I had a little bit about uh, changing men's hearts through gentleness and kindness. That's Card being pretty overt with referencing a verse of Latter Day Saint scripture. Um, the Crystal City is very much Nauvoo. I mean, even its location is obviously Nauvoo. Jay, you'll see this later on. Um, and so like that is the central question that this series is dealing with is like how do you create the city on the hill, as it were? And let's keep in mind this Card's writing this at the end of the Cold War, though he doesn't know it's the end of the Cold War. And so at this time, there's how much rhetoric about uh, American democracy versus Soviet communism, and these are the two mega structures of society that you can choose one or the other. That's simplistic, but that was in the water very much. Plus all the millennialism in the 80s and 90s as well. And anyway, that's a long way to get to the point I want to make, which is one, yeah, I think very much he's inverting the sword. He's inverting the sword imagery, right? Stormbringer is a great example. Aragorn's sword, um, swords into plowshares, right? After the second coming, when Christ's love permeates the earth and it's peace and utopia and everything. And I think it's worth noting a plow is, while it's a cultivating tool, it is a sort of controlled violence, right? You harrow the ground, right? But you do it in theory with total restraint and with deliberateness, right? It's not something you go into berserker rage and start swinging a plow around. That doesn't make any sense at all, does it? Um, and so Card is, I think, very much trying to talk. He's trying to. It's this sweet spot between the naturalistic imagery we see with the native peoples in the series and the industrial qualities of settler societies kind of intersected this one spot with the plow that it will cut the earth as much as is needed, but no more.
Yeah. Oh,
It's a
interesting.
very complex symbol. I mean, it's also gets bound into things with Joseph Smith and the Golden Plates and all kinds of stuff.
Well, because that was
That
my
that is.
first thought, Paul, was
Mhm,
like, oh,
mhm,
like because like even on the cover when it's like Alvin, he's got a golden thing in front of him. I was like,
mhm.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, golden plate, I get, but like, it's not exactly that.
Yeah.
It's like we've been talking about the whole time. It's like it's flipped a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it gets to embody also this question about if something is alive, how much can you own it? Right? Which
Right.
is
The whole
such a
trial
big,
was revolved around that, right?
yeah. And we have, and that takes on new salience today with the onset of artificial intelligence
Mm.
and both like on a material ecological level, but also questions we've been asking about AI for the past how many decades now about if it if we programmed it and it only exists digitally, but it is intelligent or supposedly intelligent, like what do we do with that, right? And is it right? How do we use that and everything? And Neuromancer is 1984. This is Seventh Son is 1987. So like these are conversations that are being had, and that percolates into the questions of slavery and other forms of exploitation throughout the series and colonialism. Like it's really shocking just how astute this series is. These books are not big,
No.
okay? Like Robert Jordan starts publishing a couple years after with Wheel of Time,
Mhm.
and any one of these is, I think, has more to talk about than any four volumes of Wheel of Time put together. Not me haters.
That's right.
I've read the first two and I enjoyed them, but I haven't been motivated to continue on in Wheel of Time yet. So
Yeah.
someday. Sam, what any I guess so that was your question.
Yeah.
Any thoughts you want to leave? Any response to what we've talked about with the plow, or any final words about the books so far? Looking ahead to Master Alvin.
Yeah, no, I think that's right because like the plow does serve the same function in terms of the story of like it being like the I don't know how you'd say it, the icon, the relic that Alvin
The
carries
iconography,
around.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
as Aragorn's sword or Elric's sword or what have you. So yeah, so I that's very cool to hear you guys ruminate on that because it I don't know why, but it just bugged me in the back of my head. It's like a plow that is so specific, and it's not like Alvin grew up like on like a big farm or something, So anyway, so that's helpful getting clarity on that. No, I guess when I first started the series, this is stupid booktube nonsense in the back of my head as to like when you arrange what you read in the order you read. I was like, okay, so I'm going to be doing a list of like books I'm looking forward to next year. And I was like, okay, Master Alvin, that's really cool that Card is finishing this series. He started in the 80s, but like I should probably start the series before I comment on that. So I literally started reading Seventh Son the day before I made my like anticipated video. And even like as far as I got into Seventh Son, I was like, oh, this is great. This is awesome. Okay, so I can put it on the list because I know I'm enjoying it. And I think I put it like halfway through the list or something like that. And at this point, it's like, it's not even a question. This is like my most anticipated book coming out this year. So I don't really have any like theories or speculations about it. I mean, the series has been, for me, um, probably not for Paul because he read all the spoilers in the Book of Mormon, but or in the Life of Joseph Smith. But for me, it's been harder to predict like what's going to happen or where it goes. So knowing, well, I guess we'll see. We'll see if this ends where Joseph Smith's story ends or not, because he's playing with it a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited to read the ending and
Yeah, great,
hopefully Card still got it.
great. Well, I don't have any. Paul, I'll give you a chance in a minute.
Yeah.
I'll um, just say, obviously, since I haven't read books 5 and 6 yet, I don't have any thoughts about Master Alvin specifically, other than I'll go back. Perhaps I was destined to read this series. There's a little historical factoid about me being a farm boy, and not only in connections to the plow, I know what plows are and have experience working them. Not only that, the Mormon Trail crossed our farm ground. Um,
Really?
it did. So when the
It's awesome.
150th anniversary of the Mormon Trail coming through, we had flags planted in our farmland to mark where it went through. We're just east of what at that time was known when the Mormons founded Council, what is now known as Council Bluffs, Iowa. It was known as Canestown, which was a
Yeah.
Mormon settlement just across the river from Omaha, Nebraska, and we're a little ways from there. So anyway,
Okay.
I know I don't know much about the Latter Day Saints faith other than the basics. I do have some historical intersection with them.
Yeah.
Paul, what any final thoughts on what we talked
Yeah.
about, master looking ahead to Master Alvin?
Yeah. So back in fall of 2016 was my first semester of graduate school, and I was writing a paper on Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I had just finished reading the series a month or two earlier, and my best friend and I were talking, and he said, "Okay, which are you more excited for, the next Susanna Clark book or the last Alvin Maker book?" Because at the time we had no idea if Clark would ever produce anything again, and at that point it had been 13 years since Crystal City had been published, and he had just read one of Card's few short stories he's written about Alvin, which are hard to obtain actually, and in the moment I said the next Susanna Clark. Well, I got that a few years later, but I have been chomping at the bit for Master Alvin, and when I found out that Master Alvin was coming out this coming spring, I was so giddy. I do have to admit that so I actually emailed Card during the course of writing my dissertation and sent him a list of questions that he actually responded to, and I did not mention this. I did not ask him for this, but he sent me the draft of chapter one of Master Alvin back in
Oh,
2022.
wow.
Um, which I promised him I would never share with anyone, so I can't. And I'm sure that it's been revised substantially since then anyway. But I do have some insight, and he shared with me a few items that I'm kind of based on everything I do know about Master Alvin, I'm like, that's a lot to cover in what is turning out to be a 480-page hardcover book. Um, but he has always been uniquely compressed with this series. Again, I mean, so to date, Journeyman has been the longest, and the mass market paperback is 400 pages even.
Yeah.
Um, and so Master Alvin is not much long. It's not even a full 25% longer than that in hardcover. Uh, I am annoyed that I worked so hard to get a matching mass market set, and that's about to be thrown sideways. But I'm going to read that book when it comes out because I'm just incredibly excited. I do know how it ends. Like I haven't read it, but I know how it ends. If you like, Card has been pretty clear about that in interviews. Like I can say that now. Or you guys, if you guys want to wait, that's really fine as well. But I am excited. It so long as Card still has he. I haven't enjoyed much of what he's written since Crystal City, I confess. But I have high hopes that his powers will return one last time for this one. I love this series dearly. It has flaws. I think there's some things that were racial, that are progressive comments about racism in the 80s and 90s that the conversation has moved since then. I think that he could do a bit better with with having just more women characters. But all when I do run all the numbers, this is still one of my absolute favorite series, far and away, with some characters that I dearly love, and I am so thrilled that I do get to see the end in just a few months.
Yes, excellent. And that was definitely my reading goal over the next 6 weeks is to finish the 5 and 6. So I'm ready to go on day one as soon as it comes in the mail. Anything else to see this? Thank you very, very much for this conversation. This has been so much fun. This is exactly why I joined BookTube. So I can learn from people who are much smarter than I am. And I have learned a lot tonight. Anything
Sam's been
else?
carrying a lot of weight this whole talk.
Yeah. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, just thanks for having me on,
Yeah.
Jay. And
Yeah.
Paul, it's great to chat with you as well, since
Yeah.
I first saw you on Philip Chase's channel talking about
Yeah.
Book of the New Sun. And so actually, like you along with Philip Chase and Christopher Rocchio and Matt and Jordan from iWizard and a few others were some of my first guides through Book of the New Sun back when I was,
Oh,
baby
nice.
reader Sam. So,
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. All
No,
right.
thank you.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you.
both.
All right. Okay.